So, we're having our first plenary for today, which is called Subversive Recollections, Inventing, Inverting, and Inheriting Visual Archives. Before we go into the plenary, I wanted to just have a very quick shout for our Image Maker in Residence program, because basically this plenary, in a way, is an outcome of that residency, because all our speakers who I'm going to present to you in a sec have been residents in that. So, like, very briefly, it says everything there. It's a monthly showcase of creative work, basically, by practitioners from different backgrounds, so you don't have to be a sociologist to be part of the Image Maker in Residence program. And our main aim is to kind of highlight ways in which we can do sociology, whether that's in the methods we use to research or in the ways we disseminate research, to do this creatively in ways that go beyond just writing and reading texts, basically. So check this out on our website. Also, there is an exhibition downstairs. And yes, if you yourself or you know someone else who you would like to suggest to become an image maker, you can also go on our website. There is like that link over there. You'll get the slides afterwards, so you can have the links where it has details about how you can submit your work if you're interested. And so, without further ado, then, I'm just gonna. So the session is, it's about archives. So whether archives, archive the past to retell histories, or the present to imagine new futures, they always have, creative potentials. And together, and with us today, we have representatives from 3 different archives. Do you want me to present you, or do you want to present yourselves maybe very quickly? Maybe that's, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, if you want to say your name and like...
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, good morning everyone. My name is Arbe Qerka-Gashi, and I founded Balkanism in 2020. It's an online digital archive and publication dealing with issues related to the Balkan region and their diasporas.
Okay. Yeah, great, amazing. So hello everyone, I'm Maria Giorgouli Loupi. I'm a member of the Feminist Library Collective, as is the person sitting next to me. In the rest of my life, I'm doing a PhD in sociology at Goldsmiths, but we're going to pretend that that's not happening today.
Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa Giorgo. I'm also part of the Feminist Library based in London. Also outside of the library, I'm a curator, but in the Feminist Library, I'm part of the arts team. Joe?
It's working. Hi, I'm Krishnakumar, the 12-year-old looking person there. And I try to run Almari, which is a collection of stories about queer closets in South Asia, but I'll tell you more when we are presenting. Outside of that, I just finished a PhD in anthropology, and I do other cool stuff because my hands can't sit still.
Great, thank you so much for being here with us. So the way we're going to do this session is we're going to hear from all 3 projects in very short, like 10 minutes presentations. Then we're going to have a kind of short discussion in the panel, and then we're going to open up for a peer-reviewed Q&A, the way we do it, the Feminist Library, do you want to... It's there. Let me give it to you.
Okay, so we're just going to be very shortly talking to you about the library. We want to do this very informally. And I had a really nice start to the morning because someone came up to me and said, I've designed something for the library. So if you have feminist library histories, please come and tell us because we'd love to hear that. So the Feminist Library and Information Centre, that's the full name, was founded in 1975, which means that will be 50 next year. And it was founded during the height of what we call in the UK the women's liberation movement. It was created by a group of women, so that interested people or the women, could find material on women's issues, but also as a space where people could organize. They could organize protests, reading groups, community outreach. So from the beginning, the library has not had any consistent institutional funding. It's been surviving thanks to donations from friends and people in the community. And that has meant that it's had to change a lot of spaces in its 50 years. The latest one is in Peckham, so we're housed inside a community centre. We're quite happy about that. But the way that we found the way that we ended up there was that the council tried to kick us out of our previous house, and the community stepped in and said, "You're not doing that. You need to give the Feminist Library a space." So what is in the space itself? We have a very large collection of non-fiction books, and these were collected until the late 1990s, as well as periodicals from around the same time. The collection of the Feminist Library also includes 15,000 ephemera, but those are housed at Bishopsgate Institute. For those of you that know, it's an archive in central London, and that's for conservation purposes. We also have a fiction collection with an almost complete run of Virago and women's press publications from, again, the women's liberation movement period. And the way that we operate is with what we call an open access policy. And that means that anyone can just walk into the space, they can pick something off the shelf, and they can have a browse, stay there for as long as they want. So one of the things that I found really interesting when I first joined the library was the unique classification system. The collective didn't really like the Jewish system. For those of you that know its particulars, the Jewish system didn't really like the feminist collective itself. So a feminist librarian that was part of the group came up with the cataloguing scheme that you can see in that big cupboard in the middle in the late 1970s. And we've been using that ever since. But part of our current collections work is trying to update this scheme, but also to come up with ways to contextualize the material in our collection. That's the system that we use for all our non-fiction books. Yeah, great. So the library's archive is mainly accessed by researchers, as one can imagine. So one of the ways that we try to reach out to wider audiences is via curated thematic displays, such as the one that you see. So we bring out material from the collection, we group it together by theme, and then that's displayed in the library for all visitors to access. And I'm going to pass on to Vanessa.
No, it's okay.
Let me just say, I just shared the materials you want me to share.
Yeah.
So these are archival materials from the library. You can have a look while you hear the presentation.
Perfect. So the Feminist Library is a non-hierarchical collective with a mix of volunteers and paid workers, but it's primarily volunteer-led. And we make decisions in a horizontal way. So we are comprised of a number of working groups, which are all volunteers, and we're always in search of new volunteers, if you're interested, or based around London. So these working groups are the events team, the curatorial team, then we have the Spanish, the English, and the Black Feminist Book Club. We have the collections team that takes care of preserving the archive as well as acquiring new material. The culture team that is in constant contact with the other groups in the community centre where we are, as well as the local communities in Peckham. And then we have the bookshop, which is one of our smaller ways of having an income, basically, which is open every Saturday. So we are one of the very few grassroots organizations in the UK, I would say, that actually have a physical space. So a big part of our everyday life is providing a safe space to our communities, a warm space where people can access the internet, read a book, as well as to organize, basically, and get together. So another part of that, I forget to do that at the same time. Yeah, thank you. So another part of that work is organizing various events in collaboration with artists, makers, collectives, even academics at times. Some of these events have been community members responding to, for example, open calls, artist residencies, writing and poetry workshops, crafting or quilting workshops, and we are particularly famous for our zine fairs, which happen at least twice a year, the Winter Fair in December and the Summer Fair in June. So apart from bringing people to our space, we also bring our material to other spaces, same way we've done here. So for example, last month we were at the Comic Festival in Helsinki. We have organized, taken material to zine fairs like Girl Zine Fair or Hate Zine, and so a lot of our archive, some of our material is not only archive, we also have created a number of publications, usually in the form of zines. Here you can see some of them. One of our most famous ones was when we were kicked out, as Maria said, from our previous space, and we were doing a massive campaign to fundraise, basically, to be able to move into our new space. So, as we said before, our main income comes a little bit from our bookshop and the Friends scheme, which is a membership scheme that starts from £3 a month. And this is the way we pay rent, basically, and how we fund all of our activities. And I will leave that with you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa and Maria. And now we're going to hear from Joe, who's going to tell us a bit about Almari.
Joe was going to test the mic again. Okay. Hi, for those of you who just entered the room, my name is Joe. For those of you who've been here, I'm representing a little idea called Almari today. A project that I began out of curiosity about my own queer identity when I first officially stopped denying that I am gay. 6 years ago, when we first put up a post on an Instagram account called Our Closet Project, the idea was to understand what the word closet meant to people who had never used this word in their English-speaking lives. So what I mean is, in India, none of us, none of my peers, none of the people I knew had grown up using the word closet to describe the space we put our clothes in. This was usually called a wardrobe, or a cupboard, or an Indian word, almari, or almira, depending on who you ask. And an almira, for a lot of us in India, was a 2-panel stainless steel cabinet made by the company Godrej. For those of you who know, but if you want to Google that, you should. And this was the place where we kept our clothes and personal belongings. So this idea of coming out of a closet it was not a narrative I had ever heard of, and it did not make sense. At the same time, on the other hand, a lot of media channels at the time would be showcasing coming out stories of Indian queer people to encourage, I think, other people to come out or show other people that it might be safe, even though it wasn't. Even I was on a list of 25 young people who came out of their closet, but somehow it didn't make sense to me because I didn't know what this closet was that I was coming out of. And so, like most cool projects, I asked 5 other queer friends of mine to tell me what their closet looked like, smelled like, what it contained. Basically, if you're coming out of somewhere, where are you coming out of? It was a very naive question in retrospect. I wanted to know how it looked, how it sounded, as though to fill my own supposed closet or cupboard with ideas of what they had in theirs, so that I could actually come out. Once these descriptions came in, I've put one of the descriptions there, but a lot of the descriptions are not there on the slides because I know it can be really distracting to hear me speak, look at the almaris and read the descriptions. So if you do want to look at them, go on almari.wordpress.com. All the stories are there, and we're on Instagram as well. But don't do it now, please listen to me, thank you. But anyway, once these descriptions came in, I thought then that it would be cool to get these drawn up since all the descriptions were so visual. Coming out stories, however detailed they were, couldn't capture how my closet eventually would have a bottle of Vicks Vapor Rub because it smells like my mother. Or that a closet would be floating in space, in nothingness. Or that someone would describe theirs as a cave or a shrine and not a closet at all. I then got in touch with 5 other friends who were professional illustrators to draw the descriptions up. And the project became not only about the descriptions, but also the connections writers made with their illustrators, who had their own style, their own interpretations and additions that they were met with. So it became a really cool conversation between 2 people to bring this space to life, which was usually thought of as a metaphorical space, a closet that you were coming off, to actually think of what that might look if it was drawn out onto a page and could actually be explored by other people. How do you explain things that are left unexplained? Like, for example, why is there a moon outside that window, and why are there yellow flowers, and why is there an iron in this person's closet? Almari since then has collected 170 such stories and accompanying illustrations. And as I have collected these stories and connected people to illustrators and been the professional uploader of all the stories in this project, there are a few questions that I have sat with and which I have been exploring. And it's been 6 years now. I was actually counting yesterday because I forgot. We've thought a lot about language from the beginning. Why closets? Why not caves? Why Hindi? Why Malayalam? Why Tamil? Why the languages we use? A lot of the almaris are now being translated, which were first written in English because that was the first language I was able to speak to people in. And they are now being translated in as many languages as possible so that they can be read as widely as possible. I've got comfortable with not knowing an answer on what I'm coming out of. I still don't know. This also means that Almari can host so many more stories about the needlessness of the language of coming out for some of us. If we've never actually been through something like that, even if it may be beneficial to others to use that language. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the pros and cons of having the first stories illustrated and having professional illustrators provide their visual language. A lot of my work now is to undo this expectation and invite anything that comes as part of the Almari. Photos, fragments, even nothing. I ended up talking about some of these thoughts in a book chapter eventually, but my question is, what would Almari be if I never involved illustrators in the first place? If people could send whatever they wanted. And finally, I've been thinking about what it means for Almari to be an accidental archive. These were meant to be stories for us, by us. The reason the project started was because I was curious, my friends were curious, and we wanted to understand. And it was a love letter, each almari to past selves, future selves, other selves scattered across the world. For it to be recognized as an archive brings up questions of what stories are left out and how there must be many more stories to fill these gaps. And 170 is nearly not enough in a country like India. That's probably the best thing about an archive in the making, I think. We can adjust and shift and be flexible since we are collecting these stories for ourselves. And probably nobody else, because I honestly don't know who's looking at the Almari page other than myself, so I can do what I want. Anyway, at the moment, Almari is on a break because I was finishing up my PhD. But the more recent stories I have collected come with whatever they want in terms of visuals. Photos, drawings, doodles, collages, anything and everything. And I can't wait to see what it becomes next. And if there are any South Asians in the room who are queer and who want to explore this, please write to me. Otherwise, there's a workshop I'm doing tomorrow, so you can come to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let's now also hear from our final speaker, which is Arbe.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up because I can't see my photos, so... Amazing. Thank you all so much for coming this morning. So I'm here to present Balkanism. Balkanism was an initiative that I founded in 2020. It was the height of COVID, and I saw that there was a real necessity for Balkan issues related to the region and its diaspora communities to be explored in a more progressive way. The Balkan region, for those of you who don't know, is located in southeastern Europe, encompassing a variety of countries and different cultures and identities that through the years have experienced a great depth of of issues related to genocide and ethnic cleansing. My parents particularly kind of came to this country as refugees during the 1990s. So we're a digital platform that aims to foster kind of healing and inter-ethnic solidarity amongst people from the Balkan region. And it all started off from kind of like really analyzing the images within my own family's archive. So these two beautiful people are my parents, and it serves as like one of my favorite images. I remember as a child kind of seeing this image and my dad being like, weren't we so beautiful, Arbe? And I'm like, yes, you were. I would always kind of engage in conversations about their experiences because their identities were so nuanced and complex. So my mom and dad were both born in Pristina, but my mom is from a Turkish-speaking family within Kosovo, and my dad is Albanian. And so they kind of experienced kind of like certain different barriers in the way that kind of happened, their relationship occurred, which always kind of like really urged me to kind of archive this and start doing this in a more kind of official setting through a digital platform. Now, Balkanism deals with a wide range of issues, but we really focus on intergenerational history and personal narrative. So again, this is a photo depicting my grandparents and also my great-grandmother, and it was really important for me to kind of use these images as a way to speak to much greater societal issues to do with the kind of like ethno-nationalism and issues to do with kind of racial and ethnic hierarchies within Kosovo. So within this image specifically, so my family has a very rich and old history within the city of Pristina. And although my grandmother, who's adorned in this very intricate traditional clothing, kind of like depicts the dress of urban women, she actually was a woman that came from the farmland. So again, it kind of speaks to multiple narratives that were very, very integral to the way that I was doing work as a person. And so Balkanism has developed and definitely grown throughout the years, but my personal narrative has always been very key and integral to the work that we do, due to my ethnic background being quite diverse and complex as well. Oh, other way. So we also focus on deconstructing ethno-nationalism and reconnecting communities. As somebody who is from Kosovo, I understand the kind of impact of war and ethnic cleansing. So this image in particular depicts my dad, the chap in the back, with a group of his friends having drinks, kind of like very Yugo-esque kind of vibes. And the woman in the front and the other man is also a Kosovo Serb. And so my dad's Albanian, they are Kosovo Serbs. And it kind of really kind of deconstructs this ideology that we all inherently hate each other, which is a narrative that it really kind of perpetuates itself about the Balkan region. And it's something that deeply irritates me. But we do this in a way that is very authentic and people-focused, because sometimes there can be a very kind of liberal-esque approach of kind of like reconnecting communities in a way that it really isn't nuanced and doesn't speak about the societal power structures that were in place. So although, for example, my dad is sitting with a group of his friends, he was also very racialized as an Albanian man within the former Yugoslav structure. So within Balkanism, we really make sure to represent that and make sure that we're not kind of skimming past the nuances of people's lived experiences and their experiences of different forms of discrimination. And we aim to do this in order to reconnect communities and really deconstruct these ethno-nationalist ideologies, which are sadly still very prominent in the region. So another aspect of my work is really focused on reclaiming material culture. As a researcher, I adore kind of traditional clothing that's found in the region. This is depicting my maternal grandmother with her two sisters. She's wearing something known in the Balkan region known as shalvar, which were basically harem pants, which are very common in the Balkans. We also call them dumia. She's also decked out in kind of like a top known as a yelek, which is something that is also quite prominent. And on the face, each of them have a type of traditional face painting, which would accompany kind of like floral elements and motifs, which I also thought to be really beautiful and stunning. And reclaiming material dress was very important to me because sadly, even traditional clothing becomes super ethnically charged and nationalistic. There's different communities trying to claim traditional clothing with the agenda to say this is solely ours, whereas when we look through history, we see these traditional elements being worn by people from all different types of cultures and identities. And this is something that I'm really focused on reclaiming and also exploring the diverse traditional dress of the Balkan region. the Balkans kind of like, we're in a crossroads of many sorts, and it's kind of been a cliche for us historically, of us being like not East and not West, and this kind of like whole narrative. But we really do have such diversities when it comes to traditional dress and cultural expression, and this is something that has really been focused on the platform. If you go onto the platform, you see so much imagery and identity explored with the agenda to make people feel joyful about their cultural heritage. So, as is the case for a lot of us in this room, we come from diaspora communities. So my parents came to the UK at a time that was very difficult in Kosovo's history. They came here during the early 90s, which was the beginning of the collapse of the former Yugoslavia. And this photo is depicting my mother and my eldest sister, Margareta. And these photos are very integral to me because they kind of depict their kind of early stages within London, kind of finding spaces that reminded them of home. And Barking Park, I'm from Barking, by the way, which is in East London. Barking Park was such an important place for my parents because during that whole asylum process, they really weren't able to leave the country. They weren't able to travel. They weren't able to go anywhere on summer holiday. So this kind of like small oasis of greenery was such an integral part of my family's experience and diaspora identity during that time. And so this image kind of depicts my mother and sister kind of twinning in not traditional dress, in kind of like regular clothes. And these diaspora narratives really serve as such an integral part of me as a person as well, because I was born in London, so I was born removed from Kosovo, but inherently connected to it in a way as well. And I always try to make sure that I'm representing this through Balkanism, because I don't have a lived experience of the region, and sometimes I create meaning from images and archival photos that are quite conceptual, but from my perspective. And I do that with the goal to kind of create more relationships and create more inter-ethnic solidarity and healing for the community. But I also reflect on what I don't know. So, for example, I wasn't in this image. I give it meaning that is very, very integral to me as a person, while also making sure to speak to the individuals in the photos as well. But say, for example, with my grandparents' photos, I don't have them around for me to speak about the intricacies of, you know, the setup, where they were, who they were with. So I always try to make sure that I'm being as historically accurate as possible, but also using these images in a very progressive way to speak to communities in the diaspora, to really foster kind of more communication between individuals, and to make sure that we're really approaching more progressiveness within the region, because I think that's something that is really important for us as well. So Balkanism is developing. We are currently in the stage of launching our own publication, which I have titled Diversity as Strength. I really wanted to be able to create a publication that focuses on presenting the diversities of our region in an inherently positive way. And one of the ways that I decided to do this was kind of framing ethnic minority communities kind of like loud and proud in relation to the Balkan region. So here we have our cover, which depicts a Kosovar Roma woman wearing traditional henna style henna on her hands, which is something that people often don't associate with Europe or don't associate with, you know, certain cultures. And it's something that I've been really focused on making sure that people acknowledge that is also a part of our region and a part of our world. And it's something that I'm really focused on representing. So in this publication, we have a whole diversity of articles, essays, poetry, prose, photography, artwork that really deal with kind of like representing the Balkans in a way that is as diverse as possible, whilst also being focused on making sure that nuance is a key part of the way that we're doing this. Because like I said, our goal is to really make sure that people feel represented and feel safe within Balkanism as a platform. So watch this space. We're launching at the end of September. If you want to follow us for more regular kind of content, please do on Instagram. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I keep on, like, every time we meet and I hear more about the projects, I just keep on coming with more questions in my head and more interesting thoughts. And yeah, I just have like 3 questions in front of me now, but I'm like really excited. Like initially, just to contextualize, I thought these three projects all do things that can come in dialogue interestingly, because they cover different contexts and different geographies, but at the same time they subvert ideas and understandings, like sociocultural, let's say, understandings that are taken for granted, and indeed within contexts that are already not mainstream. So what I mean by this is, like, for instance, like starting from Joe, for example, it's like it's about subverting understandings of or deepening, or questioning taken for granted understandings of queerness, and queerness is already not always a mainstream topic. And but yeah, but by the way, I always keep on thinking that, like, in Greece, like, it used to be, nowadays the closet has been internalized as a narration because of, Western. Anyways, let's not get into this topic of whether, but anyways, but it used to be like it was a tortoise shell, like the first, in 2000s, the first LGBTQ plus movement materials, let's say, that came out were calling people to come out of their tortoise cells, not closets. So already there you see a different kind of approach to, a wider understanding of queerness beyond just that, basic. And then we have, like, the feminist library, which is inheriting an activist archive and kind of, and within a feminist context, that's again not always a mainstream context, trying to find ways to make it more intersectional, more inclusive, more trans-inclusive as well today, basically, through different activities. And of course, Balkanism, which is, again, like, by default, the Balkans are often not in the mainstream or obscured because of this kind of semi-peripheral character they have, right? So, and then again, about subverting this, and whenever we talk about the Balkans, usually in the more mainstream way, it's about, claiming different national, ethno-national heritage and cultural things. And, Balkanism is arguing for this denationalization of that region, basically. But yes, I'll come back to this in a sec. But I think first I'm going to ask you about your, archival practices, because I think it's very interesting. Like, you have all mentioned gestures that involve, like, from making new archives or inheriting older, whether that's activist archives or family archives, and then, interpreting and sustaining them. I was wondering, what would you define as an archival practice then in that context? Because, that's so many different things that what we may often think of as an archival practice. And whether you think these practices expand or go beyond typical, more institutional archival practices, like, we have big archives such as libraries or museums, for example. And how do they go beyond, if they go beyond? Sorry, too many questions in one there. So what we can do is, like, take a round, maybe, and then you all, yeah.
So since this was not supposed to be an archive, I don't have there is no archival practice that I thought of. But on further reflection, I think what I've been trying to do is not curate, because all stories are important, and how Almari has been working is there is a Google form, people who find it. And as I said, I only see myself as a professional uploader and admin person of the entire project. So whatever comes to me. And then it goes on what is now apparently an archive. More other people have told me it's a visual ethnography. I didn't name it that. So, but I mean, the language is cool, and this is how we get funding, so I'll call it a visual ethnography. And I think another, what I would call an archival practice, is not to focus on scaling at all. I've not been obsessed with growing Almari or making it, I guess, getting it everywhere as possible. I just haven't focused on scaling it at all. I've just let it take its own life, and it's working fine up till now. You found it, so it's fine. It's okay not to scale. And I think that is something I have to remind myself, because sometimes when you start something in a capitalist economy, it's all about scaling. It's about pushing it to grow more than it should naturally. So that's my archival, non-archival practice.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you for the inspiration. I wanted to pick up from what Maria said before, and then something that you said as well. So one of the ways that we've been collecting material throughout the years is what you mentioned at the beginning, that someone came to us earlier and said, oh, I have designed something for the Feminist Library 30 years ago. And we were like, oh my God, can we please see it? Can we do something about it? Can we do maybe an event? Or I don't know, can we have like a conversation? So it's more about conversations happening at random times, at material that a lot of people might not deem significant, but we actually see a lot of life in it, and then bringing it into more life and into contemporary realities. And then the way that we have been archiving over the years as well is that we did not used to choose what we were getting. It's more like people were kind of dumping their libraries on us. And this has happened a lot throughout the years, to the point that we do not have space for our material. And we are very lucky now that we are in this community center in Peckham that has some space, which is not enough. And we are almost trying to descale our collection. But the thing is that we never used to curate what we have, to the point that now we are representing some communities more than others throughout the history of the women's liberation movement and the feminist movement in the UK. That now we are trying to curate more what we already have, or what we're trying to get to actually make it more representative of reality, rather than the people that happened to bump into us and wanted to give their material. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Yeah, feel free to add.
I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, great. I just want to add, because you started by saying that, feminism might not always have been mainstream and these archives are subverting. I think when the Feminist Library started, feminism was not mainstream, for sure. And this was the archival practice at the time. And then 50 years later, we can tell that maybe not a great idea. But the thing is, as time went on, the library survived despite all odds. I don't think anyone thought it would be alive. Other libraries with feminist material that started at the time have either closed down or they've been absorbed by universities that restrict access to them. And I think we found ourselves, and now I'm talking about us and the current collective, with this huge archive that we're not really sure how it came to be. So we're trying to discover past archival practices by guessing, really, or by meeting people in events and asking them what was happening. And then trying, as Vanessa said, to include more people than we can find in the archive. And thinking, are we continuing what these people that started the library were doing, or are we doing something completely new? And because there's so many silences and gaps, even though we are scaled up. Like the amount of material and the years that we've been open, you would think that that's scaling. But we're still at that place where we're like, we don't know what we're doing.
Thank you.
I think for me, I studied a history BA degree, so I definitely kind of internalized a very traditional approach to archiving, and feeling the necessity to make sure that the way that I presented the archive was very traditional and very British and very kind of like that approach. And so I definitely, when I kind of inherited all these archival photos, archived them in the kind of traditional way that one does. But then I saw the necessity of including personal narrative, and it became a bit more kind of holistic with it and a bit more free with the way that I would produce material, because I felt like the more traditional way was very detached, and I really wanted to make sure that personal narrative was kind of like a core element to the way that I was presenting these images of my family, because they are so deeply personal. And in terms of scaling up, I really haven't had a choice. Balkanism is a very progressive space, and I feel like Balkan people have really desperately wanted that. And we're nearly at 50,000 followers on the platform. And so I really haven't had much of a choice, because when I started it, it was very much focused on me and my relationship with the region. But the more kind of like the growth came, the more people wanted their photos and stories archived. And so it was kind of incredible how like, it's almost like Balkan people forced me to become an archive, which is kind of like the stereotype of Balkan people being very strong-willed. But like, yeah, they were like, I want my photo on the page, like, please post it. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's do this. So it was a very much like from people approach, which was really, really great. And the fact that they really wanted to see their stories reflected really pushed me to kind of create Balkanism or curate Balkanism in the way that it has, which is using kind of traditional methods, but in a very non-traditionalist way, and kind of like queering, I guess, the traditional archive as well.
Wow. So many different practices. I mean, for people who know me, you can already understand that I'm very deeply invested in all these projects as well myself, because these are all things that very much interest me. I'm going to get back to, you know, more practical things in a sec, but first, I think let's get back to the thing I said at first, which is like about this kind of, you know, identity making through archives, basically, and we even had like a very brief chat yesterday. But one of the main issues with archives in general, now not with your archives, but is the way they mark the existence of certain identities, or they leave, you know, other certain identities unmarked by not including them. So all of your projects, as I said earlier, seem to subvert taken for granted understandings of different identity factors, markers, right? Such as gender, sexuality, ethnicity, etc. So how do you see your archival practices dealing with such issues of identity marking, unmarking, remarking, whatever? And are there any ethical considerations, you think, or pitfalls that these processes involve and that you may want to highlight, or things that you are finding yourselves considering often? Sorry if that's a very hot question. And yeah.
I feel like for the ethical considerations, I've, as part of my presentation, I've been talking about some of the things I've been thinking about for the past 6 years. But for the first part of the question, I think I have a much better answer, so I will go for that. So, I mean, Almari started literally because I did not feel seen in the grand narrative of queerness in India, which is usually filled with often a lot of gay men, sometimes, or most times, upper class people, upper caste people. For those of you who have an understanding of how caste functions in Indian society, it is very much entrenched in Indian society. So I just didn't feel as seen as a trans person who doesn't belong to an upper caste in many ways. So a lot of the stories that I was seeing was very trans exclusive. So I think the reason why me and my friends thought, okay, this was a worthwhile project to go forward with, was because we felt very unmarked in the larger story of queerness in India. And Almari in a lot of ways is about remembering, because we all have stories within our ancestral lives of queerness that has existed, transness that has existed. I know directly there are ancestors I can think of just based on random stories that my parents have told me that were definitely somewhere a little bit queer, but there is no space to discuss that or think about that without the language I have been given, and that's exactly the problem, right? I wanted to change the language with which I was talking about my own queerness, the queerness of my family, and when I say language, I don't just mean English or languages like Hindi that have, and I'm South Indian, so Hindi as a language has also been pushed upon South Indian folks. So there's a lot of challenging that is happening. There's a lot of unmarked territory that we were trying to push against. And I think with personal narratives, one story at a time, Almari became just about remembering and actually trying to get deep in touch with what space we are occupying in our lives if we did not have English as a language to talk about it. It is ironical that most of the descriptions are unfortunately in English, but a lot of them afterwards started coming to me in different languages, which we had to then translate into English. So it's, as I said, like it's been taking its own journey based on whoever is seeing it and whoever is deciding to write for it, whoever is deciding to design it. But I think I just want to sit with that. If we are able to just remember who we were, not just pre-colonialism, but pre many things. Because colonialism is not the only thing we're fighting in the country. So anyway, I am going off into a direction. I'll stop.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vanessa heard ethical and she started frantically pointing at me, so I guess I'm answering this one. Ethical. So I had heard about the library before I came to the UK, when I was in Athens, and it seemed like this magical place where everything is feminist and amazing. And don't get me wrong, it is. I still feel like that when I walk in the building. But I think the makeup of the collective, when most of us joined in the last couple of years, we're not even reflected in, not the collection itself, but when we hear of the women's liberation movement in the UK, the narrative includes very specific people. It's white British women that were sometimes middle class, might have been working class from like, I don't know, a family with a very communist background. So there's a very specific type of person that's represented. And for the first couple of years that we were active, we were thinking, do we want to change that? Do we want to bring more people into the archive? And then we started doing the displays that we showed you. And we found so many people in our own archive that were not white. We found Black women's periodicals. We found Southeast Asian organizing happening in the library space. And so I think our ethical considerations are more to do with trying to keep true to what the library was, while at the same time rediscovering what it was, and always, I guess, like challenging ourselves to think: is this me not feeling represented, or is it truly missing something? And both things can be true at the same time. You know, that's okay. And then there's a lot of tension around the fact that we are a collective. We're not a university library. We're not a museum. And we do want to be functioning as a social space as well as an archive. And so there's a lot of tension between those two functions, and how do we make sure that they work well together, not compromise them, but make them work well together and feed off of one another. And so how do we exist as an activist space if all of our space is filled with archival material that no one wants to look up? And then, in turn, how can we inform our own activist practice using our material? So those are the kind of conversations that we're having that we don't have an answer to. So I'm going to stop.
Yeah, if you want to add.
I might just make a comment to that, I don't know, might be diverting from the question a little bit, but that's part of the work that we're trying to do, as we showed, for example, with the Palestine archive display, or a lot of the events posters that we showed you. So we've done like dinner tables with people from the Balkan diaspora. We've done, or we do like dinner tables. We've done dinner tables with Jewish communities, writing workshops for Black folks, or only Black folks events. And we're trying to bring our archive to the front. Also, for example, when we do open calls, and artists respond to these open calls by reflecting on our material. So, because as Maria said, it's mainly researchers that come to our archive, and we don't want that. We want a wider audience. We want more people that don't all have PhDs to come to our space and read the books and find a safe space. And that's a way that we found that kind of works sometimes, is through events and bringing people together and discussing, whether it's picking up a book and discussing about what we found interesting in that book, or eating food, or sometimes karaoke's. So yeah, this is a way that we're trying to overcome sometimes our ethical dilemmas about what we already have and how do we broaden it up in a way. Not saying this always works or that's the way to go, but this is how we're trying to say that, you know, we have this thing and it has its issues, and how do we bring it to today, and how do we make it more relevant?
I think for me, when I regarded like ethics and morality, I really focused on intention. So Balkanism as a platform was started with very good intention and with the desire to make sure that we're providing progressive spaces for people. And so I started with a working method. We have a Balkanism manifesto which kind of goes through our working method. And as the platform kind of out of my control grew very rapidly, I saw the necessity to kind of broaden our team. So with that, we kind of initiated an open call for development of a working group. So now we have Balkanism ambassadors that really create content for the platform for their own respective identities and communities. Because with a region as vast as the Balkan region regarding different ethnic communities, me being the sole curator of people's narratives just simply wouldn't be ethical. And so I made sure to include people from different ethnic backgrounds to make sure that they are producing their own content and producing the way that they want to see. And we also did this with kind of working with different people from different identities. I'm very kind of like honest with people, and I would put stories out and say, I don't know about this specific issue, I don't know about this specific experience, can please somebody contact me, let's speak, let's have a Zoom call, let's develop something to make sure that you are controlling the narrative over your own community. So Balkanism, although it started with my real focus and my real relationship, has definitely transformed into a very communicative and community-focused space, which I think is really beautiful as well, because I really didn't start Balkanism with that agenda, but through the years, we've definitely kind of also been very firm, because I feel like when you go on Balkan social media, it really is hell, I'm not gonna lie. You go in that comment section and all you see is flags, 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 or like fire emojis and just people going insane at each other. But I said I'm putting a stop to that. I'm not going to do that. Balkanism will not be that space. And through the years, what I just do is block, block, block. And it's really become like this thing that like I have to make sure that I'm curating the space for people who are from my culture and from my background, to make sure that they're feeling joy when they come onto the Balkanism platform. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't allow open conversation, because obviously I'm not a dictator. But even though that would be, you know, I make sure that open conversation is allowed, but when it comes to issues of discrimination, homophobia, racism, transphobia, etc., we just simply are very, very fine-lined and kind of like nonsensical when it comes to that. So creating that kind of like working method, creating a manifesto, creating a kind of like a process is something that's very important to Balkanism.
Thank you. Again, very interesting approaches that are somehow parallel, but also, you know, unique in their own context. I find this very fascinating. But let's, you know, explore this further in the Q&A. And my last question then for you is, because we are at the Sociology conference. And I'm aware that, you know, with maybe a couple of exceptions, like not all of you are sociologists necessarily, or even academics necessarily, yet. I was just thinking about, you know, how within academia, let's say in general, we do research in often, not, I mean, many people not nowadays, but, you know, traditionally research is quite, especially research with archives, it's quite dry in a sense. Like, you know, you treat archives as data. You go look at them, read at them, interpret them, analyze them, write something. Okay, so, no, maybe not, I don't know. But I was just thinking that, like, you know, whether you ask who belongs in the feminist space in London today, for instance, on what is seen as queer experience in a South Asian cultural context, or how we can think of cultural heritage beyond the nation state in, you know, the contested area of the Balkans. Your projects all explore these questions in creative ways, as Vanessa, for example, said before, like different practices that go way beyond reading and writing, basically. And I think my last question was, I just wanted to come back to this kind of more practice, methodological issue of asking whether you think there is something valuable within this more visual or sensory, if you want, approach into, you know, doing research in the broader sense. Whether that involves, you know, doing events? Like, can we think of, organizing events as part of doing research, for instance, or archiving digital images, or looking like? Sorry, I'm just a bit rambling here. But basically, my question to you is, do you think there is any value in researching beyond traditional ways and producing things that are more than texts? And if so, do you have anything to add to this as a kind of final comment before we open up for a Q&A?
Sorry, I realized they already answered that in advance.
And the answer is yes.
No, but I wanted to refer to a nice project that we did a couple of years ago. So we got some funding to do some bits, and we've been trying to digitize some of our material for a long time now, but there's a lot of issues with copyrights, especially for the periodicals, with publishers, etc. So we thought of focusing to our ephemeral material. As Maria mentioned before, we have about 15,000 ephemeral material from the 1950s, 60s, and a lot of them are housed in the Feminist Library. Some of them are in the Bishopsgate Institute. So more properly archived and preserved. So we've been trying to make this material accessible to people around the world, basically. And we got this funding to photograph them properly, make them available online, and we did an open call for people to do some research on the background of these posters that wouldn't be just name, dates, I don't know, what it was about. More about the context of the time, some stories. And we got a very nice kind of exhibition, collection of material that included people writing poems about some of the posters, talking about some of their personal histories or how family members were involved in some of the process that were depicted in the posters. And we had respondents from actually all around the world, which was really, really nice because, okay, pre-COVID, the only people that could access the space were the people that were living in London or that could travel to London. And then over COVID, yeah, we had Zoom, but no one really does Zoom events anymore. So this was a very nice way to get people involved in our space and in the archive, and seeing that there is potential in continuing this kind of projects and reviving it in a way. So that was very nice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I realized that we took your spot. I'm so sorry. But I guess what I wanted to add was that if we leave academic research aside for a minute or forever, no one knows. I think what we call like archival practices and working with archives and doing research, which I don't find dry, but I realize I'm weird, that's fine. It's a very colonial Western thing to do. So Arbe is working with family pictures, and you don't stash those away until someone comes around 50 years later and wants to do the history of the region. What you do is you take them out of the box every once in a while and you show them to your family and you have a conversation about them. Or if you're in a feminist collective, what you do with your material is that you show it to younger members of the collective. When you want to put out a publication, you look into what other people were doing before you and you use some of their material. So I think what we're trying to do is not really a new or a very radical thing. It's what a movement should be doing, and it's what normal people have been doing before academics came in and just kind of ruined archives for the rest of us.
Yeah, and with Almari, for example, we made it a postcard project so that people can very similarly share it with people who they want to share it with the descriptions in the back, the illustrations in the front. Another thing that I knew with my capacity I could do is do the kind of workshop I'm going to be doing tomorrow, for example. So using Almari, using the archive we've created, the stories we've collected, to get other people to think about and be in touch with their stories without the language that we have been given. So what would our stories be without that language? And all of us can think about that. It doesn't have to be a South Asian queer story. It can be all of our stories. So what does that look like really? And that's what I've been trying to do within the case of workshops and having those conversations. So yeah, the archive has always moved beyond it. Categorization is what came later. It has always been fluid.
I also think archives can be really fun. If you go on Balkanism, I make an effort to make sure that we're focusing on like diverse historical and cultural traditions, and the platform generally is aesthetically beautiful. I do say so myself, but we do a lot of creative content and musical content that really engages people, not only from the Balkans. The amount of non-Balkan people that we have on the platform and are like so vehemently like Balkan allies now is really beautiful. So I feel like creating or curating kind of like archives can be done in a really creative way that really engages people from all kind of walks of life and experiences. And I think touching on themes that are inherently human and like inherently emotional is the way that we can really bring people in, because so many people from South Asian backgrounds or Middle Eastern backgrounds, North African, whatever it may be, they come onto the platform and say, I feel the same way. I see myself in these photos. I see myself in this cultural presentation. And it's something that really kind of is really beautiful for me, because I want to create that inter-ethnic, interracial, international kind of like solidarity between communities and make sure that we really are seeing the sameness within our historical lived experiences as well. Funding has been a bit of an issue for Balkanism, because we are very kind of like very fixed on like our stances politically and socially. So that has been a bit of an issue, but thankfully through a crowdfunding campaign that we did earlier this year, we were able to fund our own magazine, which is launching later this month at the Migration Museum, if anyone wants to come. More information on our Instagram as well. And it's something that is really exciting, because I want Balkan people to see themselves in a print publication in a way that has never been done before. And so this is just kind of like the start for the Balkanism publication, but we also aim to kind of really focus on developing an events program. So kind of connected to Balkanism, I launched my own, or co-founded, the Balkan London Collective, and we've collaborated with the Feminist Library. And the Balkan London Collective is an events organization, and we do like really fantastic club nights in like Dalston in East London. But we really want to branch out as well and do workshops and cooking classes. My mum's like, I will come and I will cook for everyone and teach people how to make traditional pies and different types of food. So the kind of growth and development, I really just want to curate spaces for joy, you know, the joy of like embracing your culture, the joy of seeing beauty where people have historically seen so much sadness, because although we've experienced these really harsh and difficult things, there is also really stories of beauty that really need to be shared.
Please, I want your mom to teach me cooking recipes.
Yes, I will for sure.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much.